Imagine getting an email from Spotify, not a regular promo email, not a playlist notification, but an email with just one line, "You've been selected." One sentence. That's all it took to make thousands of ARMY around the world stop breathing for a second. Because that email wasn't just any invitation, it was a ticket into a room in New York City where only 1,000 people were allowed. And one of the 7 men you'd only ever seen through a screen was now standing right in front of you. And that man was Jimin. March 23rd, 2026, New York City. Spotify x BTS, Swimside. An event that was never designed for everyone, and that's exactly why the entire world wanted to know what happened inside. We all know how massive Arirang has been since the moment it dropped. But Spotify didn't want this release to just live and die on the charts. They wanted something more, an experience you couldn't get from just pressing play alone in your room. So they chose the 1,000 most loyal listeners from the global ARMY community. 1,000 people whose streaming data, their digital dedication, their years of commitment to BTS had already spoken louder than any words could. And when those 1,000 people finally sat down in that room, none of them were ready. Not a single one of them was truly ready for what came next. The first reports started hitting timelines around 8 in the evening, New York time. At first it was just 1 or 2 tweets, but within minutes, hundreds of fan accounts were posting with shaking hands. And not in an exaggerated way, because what they were describing wasn't just another stage performance. This was something different. Jimin stood in front of them, not as a superstar wrapped in spotlights and grand choreography, but as a person, an artist who, in that moment, chose to simply be honest. The fans who were there, many of them people who had loved BTS from behind a screen for years, all said the same thing. Jimin walked into that room with a smile they described as different from his stage smile. Quieter, more real, like someone who, for the first time in a long time, felt genuinely safe to be himself without any filter at all. One fan from California who made it into the event posted a long thread on X. She said that the moment Jimin first spoke, a room that had been full of excited screaming went completely silent. Not because anyone asked them to be quiet, but because Jimin's voice carried a kind of calm they had never felt before at an event like this. He said Arirang isn't just an album. For him, it's proof that he's still here. That's roughly what the fan recounted. And that sentence, that simple, quiet sentence, made the entire room hold its breath. We need to take a step back to understand why those words hit so hard. The last 2 years weren't easy for BTS. Military service, hiatus, uncertainty. ARMY around the world had learned to live with a kind of emptiness that nothing else could quite fill. And through all of it, each member came back one by one in their own way, carrying wounds, growth, and stories that only time could write. Jimin came back with Face, with songs that spoke about pain and the search for self. And now, with Arirang, he's back again, but this time not alone. This time with 6 people who have been part of his life longer than almost anything else in this world. And that's what made the moment in New York so hard to put into ordinary words. Another fan who was there, a young woman from Texas who had been ARMY since 2015, posted a short video. Not a video of Jimin, because phones weren't allowed during the session, but a video of herself, moments after the event ended. Her eyes were still red, her hands were still shaking, and she just said one thing to the camera: he said he misses us. And I believe him. We can't verify every word that came out of Jimin's mouth that night. This event was closed, and Spotify designed it to be intimate and protected from the noise of the outside world. But when hundreds of reports from hundreds of different fans, from different cities, different countries, different backgrounds, all describe the same thing, there's something there that can't be ignored. They all said Jimin talked about missing people, missing ARMY, missing the stage, missing the small moments that often get lost behind the glamour of an international career, moments where he could stand in front of people who love him with nothing in between. The Q&A session became the most talked about part of the night. In an unusual format, no pre-prepared questions, no script polished by a PR team, fans were given the chance to ask directly. And the questions that came up were the ones that people had only ever been brave enough to ask inside their own heads. One question kept appearing across multiple fan reports about a song. Which track on Arirang felt most personal to Jimin? And the answer, according to multiple fan accounts who were in the room, made a lot of people unable to hold back tears. Jimin didn't answer right away. He paused, and then he smiled. A small smile that some fans said looked like someone trying to find the right way to be honest without hurting anyone. And then he talked about the process, about how every song on this album was born from a conversations between 7 people who have known each other too long to be able to lie to one another. "We didn't make these songs for the charts," fans reported him saying. "We made them for ourselves first, and then we decided to share them with you." That might sound like a simple statement, but for ARMY, who have followed BTS from the beginning, who know how long and winding the road has been, those words aren't just a statement about music. They're a statement about trust, about the courage to be honest with the world after years of living under a spotlight that hasn't always been kind. There was another moment that kept coming up in fan reports. A moment where someone in the room asked Jimin about his long hair, a question that might sound light and silly on the surface. But Jimin's answer made the room laugh and cry almost at the same time. He said his long hair was a decision he made for himself. A small decision that might not matter to the world, but it mattered to him. Because for years, so many things about his appearance were decided by other people, by schedules, by content needs, by expectations that kept shifting. And this long hair, the hair that has made millions of ARMY call him a fairy, call him something from another world, is a reminder to himself that he has the right to choose the small things in his own life. Nobody knows exactly how long the Q&A session ran. Some fans said an hour, some said longer, but everyone agreed on one thing: not a single second of it felt wasted. Outside the session, Jimin also performed songs from Arirang. The fans who were there said that hearing Jimin sing live in a setting that intimate was an experience unlike anything else. Not a stadium concert, not a showcase, not a live stream watched by millions. This was different. It felt like hearing someone sing just for you, even though there were 1,000 other people in the same room. His voice, they said, was deeper than what they usually heard on recordings. There was something there that even the best studio couldn't capture, a vulnerability that appears when a singer stands without any armor, just their voice and the people willing to listen. And that is what made the Swimside event more than just an album promotional event. It was something harder to define but easier to feel. Meanwhile, outside the venue, hundreds of ARMY who hadn't secured a spot gathered in their own way. Not to try to get in, but just to be part of the energy of that night, even from a distance that didn't allow them to see anything. They brought light sticks. They brought signs. They brought a kind of spirit that hasn't dimmed despite years of hardship. And when news of what was happening inside started leaking through posts from fans leaving the venue, the crowd outside reacted the way only people who have loved something completely can. They cried, not from sadness, but from knowing that what was happening in that room was something everyone inside would remember for the rest of their lives. On the internet, Swimside trended within minutes. But what was interesting was that most of the conversation happening wasn't about photos or clips, because almost none were circulating. The conversation was about feeling, about what it means to love something from far away, about what it means to finally get a moment you've only ever dreamed about. And through all of it, Jimin remained the center. Not because he was the loudest or the most dramatic, but because there was something about the way he showed up that night, the way he spoke, the way he listened to questions, the way he responded honestly, that touched something in everyone who was there. Someone from the fan community wrote this in their thread. "I've been to a lot of fan events. I've waited in line for hours for fan signs. I've watched concerts from the very back row. But tonight was different. Tonight I felt like Jimin was talking directly to me, even though there were 1,000 people in that room. And I think everyone in there felt exactly the same way." That is what happened in New York that night. An event designed to be exclusive ended up creating something that felt the most inclusive, a feeling that even people who weren't there could sense, just by reading the reports that poured endlessly through their timelines. Arirang isn't just an album about coming home. Arirang is an album about courage, the courage to return and say, "I'm still here." And Jimin, that night in New York, proved it in the most human and most sincere way possible, that the words inside that album aren't just lyrics. They're a promise now kept in front of 1,000 lucky people, and trusted to be carried forward to the millions more who are still waiting outside. If you're someone who couldn't get into that room that night, trust me, you didn't really miss out. Because moments like this don't end inside one venue. They spread. They live in the stories retold, in the feelings shared, in the connections formed between people who love the same thing. And Jimin knows that. He has always known that. That's why he stood in front of 1,000 people that night, not to perform, but to talk. Because for Jimin, music has always been the way to bridge the distance. And that night in New York, the distance, just for a moment, truly disappeared. But here's what makes this story even bigger than one night in one city. Think about what Spotify actually did here. They didn't pick fans based on who screamed the loudest on social media. They didn't run a lucky draw or a giveaway. They looked at data. Real, honest data about who had been there quietly, consistently, showing up every single day, even when BTS wasn't releasing anything, even when there was nothing new to stream. The people in that room were the ones who kept playing the old songs, the ones who never left. And Spotify saw that, and they said, these are the people who deserve to be in the room. There's something deeply moving about that when you sit with it for a second. In a world where online fandom can sometimes feel like a competition, who posts more, who trends harder, who gets the most retweets, Swimside was a reminder that loyalty doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just shows up quietly, day after day, year after year. And that kind of loyalty doesn't go unnoticed. Jimin, of all people, understands this. He has talked before about how much ARMY's consistency has meant to him during the hardest stretches of his life. And standing in that room in New York, looking out at 1,000 people who had proven exactly that kind of loyalty, he wasn't just seeing fans. He was seeing a decade of showing up, a decade of choosing to stay. There was reportedly a moment near the end of the night where Jimin paused in the middle of speaking and just looked out at the room for a few seconds without saying anything. Fans who were there described it as one of the most charged silences they had ever experienced. Like he was trying to take a photograph with his eyes. Like he wanted to hold on to that exact moment for as long as possible before it became a memory. One fan described it simply. He looked at us like he was counting us. Like he wanted to make sure we were all real. And maybe that's the most honest thing about all of this. After 2 years of separation, after months of uncertainty and waiting and hoping, standing in a room full of people who never stopped believing, maybe it took Jimin a second to make sure it was all actually real too. It was real. Every single second of it. And the fact that you're here watching this video, that you cared enough to find out what happened that night, that makes you part of the story too, even if you were never in the room. And that's the thing about Jimin that has always set him apart, not just from other artists, but from most people you'll ever encounter in your life. He has this rare ability to make you feel seen even when he's not looking at you. Even through a screen. Even through a song you've heard 100 times. There's something in the way he communicates. The pauses, the honesty, the way he refuses to give you a polished answer when a real one is available that cuts through every layer of distance and lands somewhere genuinely personal. The fans at Swimside that night didn't just witness a performance. They witnessed a person choosing, in real time, to be fully present. In an industry that often rewards carefully managed images and strategically timed revelations, Jimin sat down in front of 1,000 strangers and just talked. About music, about time, about what it feels like to come back to something you love after being away from it long enough to understand how much it means to you. That's not something you can manufacture. That's not something any PR team can script. That's what happens when someone has been through enough, grown enough, and arrived at a place where they no longer feel the need to protect themselves from their own truth. Arirang as an album already said a lot, but Jimin in that room in New York said the rest. He filled in the spaces between the lyrics. He gave ARMY the context that no line or note could ever provide. And in doing so, he reminded everyone in that room, and everyone watching from outside, exactly why they fell in love with BTS in the first place. What also struck so many people about that night was how Jimin handled the weight of the room. Because it would have been easy, understandable, even to stay behind the armor, to give warm but carefully worded answers, to smile and thank everyone and keep the evening safely on the surface. That's what most people would do in that situation. That's what the industry has trained artists to do for decades. Protect yourself, manage the narrative, give them enough to feel close without letting them actually get there. Jimin didn't do that, and fans who were in the room said you could feel the exact moment he made that choice. Early in the evening, someone asked him something. The specifics vary depending on who's telling the story, and instead of pivoting to a safer answer, he just sat with the question for a moment. And then he answered it honestly. And that was it. That was the moment the whole night changed. Because once Jimin decided to be real, the room gave him permission to stay there. And he did, for the entire night. There's a conversation happening in a lot of ARMY spaces right now about what this comeback means in the larger arc of BTS's story. And the honest answer is that nobody fully knows yet. Ararang is too new, the reunion is too fresh, and the world is still processing the fact that all 7 of them are back together doing what they were always meant to do. But what the Swimside event in New York made clear is that BTS, and Jimin specifically, are returning not as a reset, but as a continuation. They are not pretending the last 2 years didn't happen. They are bringing all of it with them. The distance, the growth, the time apart, the things they learned about themselves when they were no longer defined by being part of a group. All of that is in the music now. All of that is in the way Jimin stands in a room and talks to 1,000 people like they are one person he trusts completely. That is not something that existed before the hiatus. That depth, that specific kind of openness, it had to be earned. And watching Jimin carry it so naturally, so generously, in that room in New York, it's hard not to feel like everything that was hard about the last 2 years was somehow, quietly worth it. If you're watching this video, and you're an ARMY who has been loyal for a long time, thank you for still being here. This journey has been long, but if that night in New York taught us anything, it's that long journeys always have moments that make them more than worth it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with a fellow ARMY who needs to hear the story today. See you in the next one.